Hi, my name is Alex Konieczny. I'm a historic interpreter here at the beautiful Troy Historic Village. In 1955, Troy became a city, and since then it has grown to a bustling, multicultural city full of people from all over the world. This project, Many Stories, One Heritage, seeks to record the authentic stories of first and second generation Asian American immigrants to this city who now call it home. The following interview you're about to hear is one of 12 interviews we've recorded for the Many Stories, One Heritage project.
My family, I arrived in Detroit area in 1969, and I was married 3 years later. I went home to get married, and then I have 3 children. They're all grown and gone. So that's what my family is, 2 girls and 1 boy.
So tell me a little bit about where you were born.
So I was born in a city called Lucknow in India, and this was in 1946. And I had my earlier years in mining towns where my father worked for a steel company in India, in eastern India, which kind of remote areas from the cities. And around 1950, we moved to western India, where again he was in mines, and it was in a deserted area for gypsum. And after that, he moved back to eastern India, where they were now starting to build new steel plants. This is in the early 60s. So I was left back in western India, in Rajasthan, in a small town which is like a university town, a place called Pilani. I did my high school there, and then came to New Delhi and did my pre-medical and medical school, and graduated from my medical school in 67 and came to this country in 69. So my father stayed again in areas where there were mines, and most of these places didn't have schools, so most of my education was in a boarding school.
So what was your home in India like?
So my dad was a manager who was a graduate of mining school in like 1935 or something like that. And we lived, so my years 1 to 5 that I remember were mostly in what we considered tropical forest, jungle area with plenty of animal life. And the memories I have of that is my father bringing in a dead tiger, which he went to hunt because this was a man-eater, and so they bring it home, and I'm kind of jumping on this red tiger. So that was one of the earliest of my upbringings. Again, so this is a you would consider it a village, and the only educated people would be us and some of the other managerial staff. Us means my dad and his staff who would be supervising, and most of the villages are kind of manual labor. They dig with pickaxes and load the buckets and put it on the backs of the animals and take it over to the train siding and then dump the iron ore. So he was mostly in iron ore, not in coal mining, which is underground. And similarly, other places. So after that small town called Gomarshini, we moved to Rajasthan, where he was doing gypsum mining. Here we were staying in a city. The mines were about um, 2 hours away without any roads. You just would drive through, and it was interesting living there also. But this city living, we were living in a larger home, 3-bedroom. We had 3 cars and drivers and servants and things like that. So it was like upper middle class kind of lifestyle. And these are traditional towns. I don't know if you can imagine some European towns with the walled cities and the forts on the outside, and that our homes were outside the walls because we were new. Now this was post-independence, so we were living in what was actually British-built homes, because when the Britishers came to India, they mostly lived outside the walled cities, wherever they established. So that's where we were. And then the third time when he moved back to East, in a place called Rourkela, this was a city that was being started by the Indian government. They were building 3-4 steel plants as the government's program to industrialize the country. And this is in the mid-50s, early 60s. And so it was mostly barren places with new homes coming up. And one side was the village, and the other side is the new development. And we were in part of the new development and lived in the officer side. And again, kind of a 3-4 bedroom house, the kitchen garden in the back and a yard in the front, and whatever conveniences and things were there. But here he used to drive to the mines. We would go to limestone mines, iron ore mines, and some other mines, and we'd go with him, and we'd go home for summer vacations. Otherwise, I was in the boarding school, and so that's where we were. And then he had a home that he built in New Delhi. That was soon after coming from Pakistan, when the partition of India took place. So we were again living in New Delhi in an area which was for the refugees, where he built a home, and we would go back and forth there during summer vacations, because that was not where we were living. He rented it out most of the time. And so that was a double-story, 2-3 bedrooms on each floor, and houses next to each other with very little yard and etc. So those are the things. Whereas my grandmother, who had come from across from Pakistan and partition, they lived in the inner city, and the transition of the Hindus moving from Pakistan to India and Muslims moving from India to Pakistan. So the old city was where my mother moved with her kids. That's how it was. And then after that, Delhi has changed. So I went to the medical school, which was kind of a premier medical school. They had built in 53 or 54, and it was a fairly fancy medical school, and highly competitive to get into. And I joined that in 63, and we count our years in alumni as to which year you joined from the beginning of the medical school. And I was the 8th batch, we call it. We don't count when you graduate, because going to medical school, most people don't graduate at the same time. So a lot of people get dropped off on the way and takes other time. So when we join, we kind of make a mark. And in this country, we have a what we call Amesonians. That's the name of my medical school. Our reunions every year, and I go sometimes, but we go with my class friends would be there.
So let's fast forward a little bit and tell me about your immigration experience. What was it like for you coming here?
So the things about immigration are, it was not an immigration when I made my intention to come. The intent was to have higher studies abroad. So the trend in India, mostly for people who were graduating as we call it MBBS, which is equivalent to an MD here, was to go abroad, usually to England, and get an FRCS, which is a Fellow of Royal College of Surgeons, and return to India and do the practice. The American medical education was not recognized by India. The American postgraduate training was kind of inferior to the European training, so not many people were coming. But after the war, Europe was a disaster, and slowly people started to come to America, and the Americans by that time had got a lot of brains from Europe, plus they were also trained. So the intent of most of our graduates was to come to the US for higher education, spend 4 or 5 years and return. And I wanted to do surgery, so we pick out places where people would say you'd become an expert. And for me, big cities like Detroit, New York, Chicago were areas of interest. And my father had been here in 1946 on a 1-year education sent by his company. That's the year I was born. And when we were coming, he said specifically, don't go south. He had gone to south, and because of his skin color, he was asked to sit in the back, and the water fountain difference and stuff like that. So he had very poor experience, and so he had said, go to East Coast or Midwest, basically. And then the choice between Detroit and Chicago was essentially between me and my friends. Somebody was going to Chicago, so I said, well, go to Detroit. And so coming, the resources available from family were very limited. My father being a mining engineer and 3 kids and other things, bought me a ticket, and it was one-way ticket for $625.25. You feel that obligation all your life that your father bought you a ticket, because I couldn't afford it. And with this ticket, you could take breaks in Europe, etc. There's so many miles that were allowed and things like that. So I spent about 20 days in Europe, going to various cities, and I got a flavor of different places. Landed up in Detroit at the airport, took a Greyhound bus and came to downtown. There used to be a bus stand, and 1 suitcase and about $50 in pocket. Went to my hospital, and they said, we have some apartment if you want to share. Your previous buddy is here. So I said, yeah. So we had a 1-bedroom house, apartment on the 18th floor on Cadillac Square, looking at the river. And me and my partner, who had come a year earlier, we shared that bedroom and a living room, kitchen area. And so this was walking distance from my hospital, which was called Detroit General Hospital, which was in just the other side of the Greek town. So it was walking distance from Kennedy Square to my hospital, going through Greek town, and so that was how the thing started in the beginning, I guess. And slowly, 6 months later, I was able to purchase a car, and then 6 months after that, I moved out of downtown and came to Royal Oak. And my residency took about 5 years. In the third year of my residency, I married, and then I got a job when I finished after 5 years in 74. I started to work for a HMO system. I was not interested in setting up my own practice. Then I just wanted to be a salaried physician, and this was a position available. And we wanted to live in a metropolitan area. I had looked at some other opportunities in small towns, Colorado, Texas, Chicago, and they were paying more money, but there was nobody else there, and we felt a little bit unsuitable for that situation culturally. So we decided to stay here, and I've been here ever since I came, so more than 40 years now.
What was your first week here like? Describe your first week in the United States.
It's hard to remember that far, except I can remember a few things that were interesting. So one of the things was when I got my first paycheck, I opened an account, and that was interesting. And living in downtown, we used to go to Detroit River. And I don't know if it's not quite the first week, but I think in July. So I arrived here in July 1, and they used to have a international festival down on the riverside. And there used to be various international things. And I met another Indian. There weren't too many Indians that time, and we became friends. And he used to live in Royal Oak, and that helped out. And the other things was there was a medical student, Jerry Zaks. He was a fourth-year medical student, and I met him. And a few days later, I met his wife, and I was really touched. They were so nice to me. They invited me to their home, and then he drove me to his house, and we had a spaghetti dinner. And I said, he had no reason to be nice to me, but he remained a good helper all through the whole year. When he finished in medical school, he moved out. He was from New York, but it helped. They helped me learn the ways of Detroit, and so that was something that impressed me. And then the work at the hospital was quite different. For one thing, I had, or in India, you never saw the kind of trauma you saw here, the gunshots and the knives and the auto accidents. And this was a kind of very, very new thing. And the other piece of it was, in my training, they allowed a lot of freedom on managing these patients who were sometimes very sick and ill. And that was fascinating. And obviously that's what helped get you good training, because it was all experience and learning. They used to say that if you get trained at one of these places, Cook County Receiving, King County, you don't have to read a book. You see the whole pathology, and see all the illnesses. So That again was, we're talking about the first week, that was interesting, and the food was a problem. uh, in kind of two ways. One was quite a bit of emphasis on beef, the roast beef, hamburger, and when you have spaghetti, you have again some beef and stuff. And we're not, most Indians are not much meat eaters. If you eat meat, it's lamb maybe once a month, chicken maybe once a month, and it's also kind of, otherwise mostly are vegetarian, and the foods are fairly tasty, they're spicy, and this is so bland. So you have to get used to it, and we thought they just didn't know how to cook anything. Everything was, and the cafeteria was in the basement, and you go down the stairs, and it smells like I don't want to eat. And then taking calls, and the system at work about you're the intern, you're on the low on the totem pole, and we are working like 36-hour shifts, and a lot to learn. And the other thing that was kind of a little bit strange, I was 23 years old, and the medical students were older than me, and I had finished medical school, so that was kind of strange, and didn't realize that till a few years later, that emotionally I was much less mature than these people, especially like the guy I told you, he's married, and they are treating me. So those kind of things were things that I remember from my earliest arrival here. And I don't remember too many other things, because the program itself, there was a little bit of this difference. So in my surgical training, we were 8 or 9 residents, and I was the only Indian resident, and most others were white Americans from all over the country and Canada. And that was kind of a distribution throughout. There were 1 or 2 Indians in every year of the 5 years, and others were local. And there were some other foreigners, Filipino, and 1 or 2 Arab origin. So you could tell the cultural difference. We couldn't, we didn't quite know things. So like on the, when you're on call, you're in a room with all the bunch of other residents who are there at night. And I remember we had this Ohio State-Michigan football game, and everybody's all excited about it. And we didn't understand, what the hell they're doing, running and fighting like that for a ball, and what their goals are. But the excitement of the local people was something that you try to understand and learn. And the other thing that happened in July of '69 was this shot to the moon. So we all sat there and watched the people from moon, transmitting, and so those were things we did.
Did you speak any English prior to coming to the United States?
Yes, so from grade 9th, all my science education was in English. So physics, chemistry, biology, we were reading and writing English, but not speaking so much. In class, you would not have conversations in English, but this was then when I went to my pre-medical and medical school. It was all, education was in English, but the patient interaction was not in English. So it would be in the local language, and many times it's a blend of languages that you use when communicating with the patient. They come from many different backgrounds. And so it's kind of when I came here and I was in downtown and most of the patients were African American, it was very hard to understand them, not only their accent, but some of their words were reverse. Like if you say I'm feeling bad, it actually meant he's feeling good. You know, many of such words were there, and upchuck, and some colloquialism, things like that. So the English language that is used for learning and teaching was independent of English language that we use for communication. And of course, back home it was, as I said, you'd speak Hindi or Punjabi or Marwari. These are all different people coming from different areas. And they all live in the big cities and they speak different languages. You know, like here you'd have Italian or Chinese and something like that, Arabic. As a physician, many times you'd have these people, but here people kind of learn into English because that's what they do. But here, there's no need for that.
Earlier you said that the idea was for most people to go from India to Europe or America to get an education and then come back.
Right.
Why did you stay?
So when I came here, as I explained, I was impressed by the educational system as to how the learning was more experiential rather than rote. Like back home, you had to learn the book and learn the question and the answer, but here you are having the patient and you learn from the patient. So it was a interesting thing. So around the middle of my first year, I decided I wanted to become a thoracic surgeon. So I signed up for that. And then around about 2 years later, the laws in this country changed. What it used to be, they used to call J1 visa, which is you come here and get your training and you have to return to the country. So 1970, when did I get married? 72. I came here in 69. So 72, sometime in the summer, the law changed that the J1 visa could change to immigration as long as you signed up to go to war. The Vietnam War was going on. And so most of us did that. So that gave you the freedom to stay here for as long as you wanted, rather than this temporary thing hanging over you, and somebody has control on you, whether they are going to extend it or not. Your employer had the power to let you off anytime, and with immigration, that power is kind of diluted. So that's what happened, and by the time I was getting close to the end of my residency, which was like 4th year I had been here, I said, this was after my marriage, that I felt that I was going to be a misfit if I went back, in the sense that the training that I had was more than what I could use there, and the facilities that were here, the trained staff, the instrumentation and the hygiene and all those things, that was absent there. So it sort of didn't make sense to go back and not use all the education I got. And then the income level also was attractive. So even though during my residency the physician salary is not that much, but it's still substantial for people like me to live. As you graduate, your potential for income is increased. The other thing that was kind of a draw to stay here. The system here is fairly merit-oriented. If you work hard and you do the right thing, you're safe and you can, make your goals. Going back in India, the system is you got to know somebody, you got to kind of bribe somebody to get a job and things like that. If your dad can't help you, then you're in a limbo, things like that. And practicing medicine in India was also not kind of, you'd say, sort of honest kind of practice. You had to do things that I didn't feel were needed to make a living kind of thing. So those were the reasons I elected to stay back here. And here, as I told you, I felt more comfortable that let somebody manage the business side of medicine, and I just wanted to practice clinical medicine, and which was see patients, treat them, and let somebody do the billing and stuff like that, as long as they gave me my monthly salary. So, many people don't like that lifestyle, but there are compromises. Theoretically, you make less money if you're working for somebody than you're working for yourself. But if you decide that that's okay, other things in life are important, and the lifestyle is acceptable. Being a surgeon by itself is quite challenging, but that's what you choose to do, and that's why I stayed here. I loved what I learned here. I could practice what I learned, and had a good family environment. The wife was happy. As we spent our time here, the more and more Indians came, and our circle for the social activities increased, and we started to organize in different areas, and that's why we stayed. Continue to stay.
So you mentioned a few things that you had kind of a hard time getting used to in America. You said the food was a problem, for example. What was the hardest thing probably for you?
Well, I think the thing that was hard to overcome was this feeling of being a second-class citizen. And the first experience I had of this was in my second year of residency. And the way it happens is every year there is a certain amount of money allocated for the residents to go attend a conference. And you get a list of places you can go, and then they divide up, which resident is going to go where. And I wanted to go to a conference in Portland, Oregon. And there was another resident who wanted to go there. And my program director says, no, you can't go, because it was one of the conferences which was farthest away, and to me it was going to be a nice trip, but obviously it cost more money. So I said, but the other resident who was an American girl, I said, she's going, and what's the harm if I go? He says, no, you can't go because you're an Indian. So I said, well, that's nothing I can do about that, but it hurt me that this person could make decisions like that. So I carried that, and I tried to understand where this attitude and this kind of things is coming from, and and I became sensitive to it as there were different times, different opportunities where I felt like maybe they didn't give me the opportunity because I'm not American. And it was very obvious with some of the what we call blue-eyed boys. They were favorite of our staff and professors. So you kind of lived with that. If you make too much noise, then they have the control about whether or not you complete your residency and your training there. So anyway, so as I finished my residency, I got a little bit engaged in this issue about understanding prejudice and discrimination against one group to the other. And my conclusion was it had something to do with lack of knowledge on the part of the person who has preconceived ideas about me and doesn't know me. And we had similar thing. Like when I was growing up in India, we were of the generation which was just post-independence. And most of us were trained or programmed in schools to hate British because they were supposed to have enslaved us, and we got the independence and things like that. And then later on, there was this programmed hatred for the Muslims because we were refugees. We lost our homes in Pakistan, and we were in India and roaming all over trying to build our lives. So you meet a Muslim who has got nothing to do with what happened in 1946, but you're not supposed to like them because things like that. And so when I came to this country, I got to meet some people from Pakistan in my residency. And these people were just fine. They were just like me. They had the same background, the same language, because they came from the same area. And I said, I had to unlearn my negative stereotype of these people. And so I got that understanding, and started to do things which would help educate the people who interacted with me. One of the things was to get politically involved, to make the politicians understand wherever the unfairness was based on discrimination, and that was my earliest involvement. So I became part of India League of America, where the learning was that you got to organize, become a group, and have a representative so people can understand that you're coming with a certain amount of, so to speak, power, that you can have opinion that comes forward. And so those lessons worked. The politicians came to the India League of America, and they had to ask and learn about us and what we are doing here, how we are doing, and things like that, and what are issues and where they can help us. And so we had some issues with minority business giving and difficulty with residency programs where people were not even looked at because residencies were only for the Americans and things like that. They were not based on merit. And then there were different qualifications. If you were a foreigner, you needed to do 2 years of internship. If you're an American, you do 1 year, and you get the same license, but things like that. So all these things we started to address and were able to make changes by acting. So then there was other group that got organized was Michigan Association of Physicians of Indian Heritage. And here again, there was issues with hospital privileges and things like that, and climbing up the ladder in management and stuff like that. So these way was how we, or I got engaged in trying to, make others understand about who we are and things like that. That was what I did for the professional and the social aspect. And we did something about the religious part. We started our own temple and organized it. So I was fairly involved with the temple. Many years I was on the board and I was chairman. And again, it is interesting challenge because Indians are not a homogeneous group. They come from different parts of the country, different languages, different gods, and so different customs. But we did, and we had our kids in younger age learn Hindi, music, classical Indian dance, and learn the prayers, etc. So trying to kind of instill a Indian heritage in them as to what it's all about. So when you grow up, whether they use it or not, but they shouldn't feel that they have no anchor. So here we are, the parents, and here's the community, and things like that. So that's where we are.
Does your family keep up any of the cultural traditions that you brought from India, or speak any of the languages, anything like that in the home?
Not really. We have all so it's like this. My wife is also daughter of refugees. But whereas my parents and our family settled in northern India, her father settled in southern India, and he had joined the Navy. So she grew up learning South Indian languages and English. I grew up learning North Indian languages and English. And both of us had homes where they didn't speak, only the parents spoke the language a little bit of their origin. And I didn't grow up in the house. I grew up in different places, so didn't have any of those language things. So when we came here, me and my wife, and then what we call Indian community with all the different languages, we all speak in English to each other. And so the kids grew up speaking English. We gave them a little bit of education in the temple about Hindi and all that, but never can speak. They can barely. I mean, most of the time they understand a little bit, but when we go home, all our cousins and brothers and sisters, everybody speaks English, so that's how it is.
So you said you went to a boarding school when you were younger. How do you feel like your educational experiences are different from that of your children here in the United States?
Oh, the main difference is the involvement of the parents. In boarding school, there is essentially no involvement. And culturally, when we came home, usually the fathers don't have time to spend with the kids. So here, me and my wife have to run around till they leave the house. When they're 17 or 18, taking them to swimming, this and that, and doing the homework with them, and all these things were not there in my childhood. So, it's quite different. So I suppose I grew up mainly with my peers and my teachers, not with my parents. It's slightly different here. Here, parents are very involved in everything, violin and swimming, and whatever your grades are at the school, and teacher-parent conferences and stuff like that. And then the other big thing is there is no power for the parents to discipline the kids like we had back home. Like when I was in boarding school, there was more than once that I was caned for misbehaving and breaking rules, and even my father would give kind of corporal punishment. So that was to us normal. I mean, you'll be mischievous, you'll get beaten up or punished somehow. Whereas here, we learned pretty soon that if we did anything with the kids, they're going to go tell their teacher, and the social service is going to come in the house and talk about the child abuse. So we have to learn how to manage the kids, and then as we have got grandchildren, it is even more interesting because my daughter dictates as to what our behavior has to be with the grandchild. I mean, when we're going to visit with them, we say, have you got your immunization? Have you got this before you come here? Otherwise you can't come here. That's unthinkable when you were back home. I mean, you grew up in a family and it was a hierarchical system, and the kids had no say and things like that. And especially like the daughter-in-law or daughter saying anything to the parents, no way.
So you are now a citizen of the United States. Tell me a little bit about what it was like for you getting your citizenship and the process for you.
So from the time I got my immigration, exactly at 5 years, I got my citizenship. And at that time, they used to have the immigration office on Jefferson Road, and you had to take a oral test. I don't know if there was a written test or not, but they will ask you who's the president and things like that. So you had to prepare for the interview to get your immigration, and then I got my immigration oath, or whatever you may say, in the federal courthouse. It's on 4th Street, and we were maybe about 100 people that the judge made us take oath. And so my big thing about it was the ability to vote, and I consider that a real precious right, you may say, that you can vote here, and I have voted every time there is a vote to give, whether city, county, primary, final, everything, and then I've worked for it. I worked for candidates. I've raised money for their campaigns, and then worked on the issues, and my wife worked on the millage for building the new Troy. It failed, new Troy High. So it used to be right here where the community building is now, on Livernois, the old Troy High. So that was interesting that, as citizens you could influence the decisions about your own future, and gradually you get a little more knowledgeable. And then I attended some courses in campaigning and politicking, and got a better insight into what's rhetoric and what's policy and what's a party and what's a government and things like that. So that's what citizenship has meant for me.
Have you ever considered running for office yourself?
I was asked once to run for the city of Troy as a thing, and because I had been campaigning for various candidates at that time, and when I talked with some of my friends as to the pros and cons, and the cons won out, and because there were two main factors in it. One, that you have to have the knowledge about the issues. If you are going to be in the government, say you're in the city council, you got to know what the issue is, whether it's building the new transportation center or something like that. So there are issues like that all the time that you have to have the knowledge of. And then the second part is that you become a public figure, which exposes you to scrutiny and in campaigns, many times a negative image creation that your opposition does. And many times it is a lie, but it sticks because you don't have a chance to refute it. And those two things kind of made me think that as a physician, you really can't be in the community where people are making negative conversation about you and things like that. So I've stayed out. I just work for others, and I work in my community, try to educate them on issues and things like that. But I worked in the party level, so I was chair of the Troy Democratic Club. I was with the Oakland County Party. I was with the Michigan Democratic Party at their state level and things like that. So, but slowly I've declined now, become an emeritus member of all these places.
Is there anything in your past that you think makes you want to get involved this way? Like parent influences, maybe, or something like that.
Yes, and funnily, some of my friends asked me this recently, and I had never thought of it. But the fact is, my father was in Rotary Club in India, and he would go to these villages, and we'd tag along with him, with his Rotary Club people, where they will have these projects about improving drainage or digging a well to bring water to them, or hygiene like that. And my mother was engaged with the women, and it was called Mahila Jagriti Parishad, which stands for Women's Enlightenment Organization or something like that. And her main issue, so in North India, there's a custom of veil. They have from the top down, not the Arabic style that goes across, but and that's about the Hindu women. The Muslims have different systems. So her mission was to educate, means give literacy, and to get them to get out of parda, so socially not be subjugated by the men. And that she used to go every week to different places, and I couldn't see the value of what she's doing. I mean, it's if somebody wants to have a veil, so what it is. But I think probably those things subconsciously stayed with me. That there's always a value to try to uplift the people who are kind of less fortunate than you are, and things like that. So
when you were young, what did you want to do with your life, like really young?
So my first memory is, in fact, for haircut in India at that time, your barber would come to your house and you'd get it. And this question was asked, and I said, I want to be like Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. And he was my hero at that time. He was the first Prime Minister of India. And I said, when I grow up, I want to be like that. So that was like, as in 5th or 6th grade. Then when I came to 8th grade and 9th grade, you have to make a choice. Either you do mathematics or biology or other. And nobody did the other. So, and I was no good at mathematics. So I went to biology, and that determines whether you're going to be a doctor or you're going to be an engineer. And the third piece in my school, was not encouraged or available, but that would be the route to become an accountant or a lawyer or something of a non-scientific line. So I knew in my ninth grade that I wanted to be a physician. And then in my zoology classes, I was the leader in doing the dissections on the frogs and the earthworms and things like that. And when I went to medical school, we had to do cadaver dissections. And I was like better than anybody else. And that time I felt like I will be able to do surgery. And I had a good photo memory, so my knowledge of anatomy was again fairly good and better than a lot of people. Plus, I had a role model in a place called Rourkela, where my dad had gone in the 60s. There was a surgeon, Dr. Dhillon. He trained in UK, and he was in UK for about 7-8 years and returned with an English wife. And he was doing surgery of the chest, and this would be in the 60s, and that was a high-risk surgery at that time, and you were like at the top of the line if you could do a thoracic surgery, and that's what I wanted to become. I wanted to become a thoracic surgeon when I grow up, kind of thing. So that's how I chose my line.
Tell me about your first job, first thing you ever did for money, I guess.
So I'd considered job after my residency, though for me the first job was residency. That's the first time I was beginning to earn money, but it was really not payment for services. It was a stipend while you're at school. But the first job, I was at Metropolitan Hospital, which was located on Webb Street and what's 12th Street area. So it's a kind of a landmark, and I think it is now called Rosa Boulevard.
Rosa Parks Boulevard.
Rosa Parks Boulevard. They changed the name of that street, and that's the street. There were riots just the year before I came in '67. So this hospital is like 2 miles north of Henry Ford Hospital, which is at the level of Midtown area and junction of John C. Lodge and Davison area. And this was a original TB hospital, and over the years TB had gone away, and so this became a hospital, and it was taken over by United Auto Workers. UAW owned this, and one of the reasons was that Henry Ford did not allow African Americans to be treated at Henry Ford. And they, as UAW members, wanted to have their own facility, and it was created on the principles of Kaiser, which was that you don't pay for your treatment every time you're treated, but you pay a monthly premium for total care. I'm trying to think of this name, but the principle was when the railway line was being built from East Coast to West Coast, the whole labor will go together, and the doctor is going to be going together. So the doctor got paid a certain money, like a nickel per patient, whether or not they saw the doctor, and he'd stay there. So they got the monthly salary, which was stable based on this payment system, and that's the way this was set up. So this was the original HMO in Michigan area, where you got total care, clinic and hospital care, and the doctors were on salary kind of thing. So as I told you before, I like that idea of having a salaried position where you are not having to debate whether this operation will pay me more or the next operation will pay me more. So you make a decision based on what is more for you, and may kind of foggy up your judgment on what's best for the patient. So I like that, and I was good when I started. So very soon, within 2-3 years, I became the assistant chief, and then 5 years later, I was chief of surgery, and then I became associate medical director in charge of clinics, etc., etc. So the original idea that I said, if you work hard and you're good at it, you get rewards, and that happened. I mean, there are various little obstacles that you learn to overcome and things like that, but I basically got satisfaction from doing what I was doing, and thought I got compensated adequately, and we did all right.
So you're involved with a number of groups that work for some social change. Is there anything you do in your personal life to accomplish similar goals?
So in personal life, I have basically tried to educate myself. So I have always had I should say, the ability and inclination to read other things. So as I have, I would say, matured through the times here, I have read a lot about the religion and the culture and the politics that surrounds me, and that has transformed me to the extent that the times have changed. So I remain open to learning new things, not just professionally speaking, that you learn new skills and new knowledge in surgery as to instrumentation and the new operation, but here also as to what's the Jewish thing and what's the Christian thing and Republican, and this. So all this has to be learned. It just all you see in the television is not what is really education. So we've been always very selective, especially when the kids were growing up, not to have too much TV at home, and get them to read books and things like that. And we did the same ourselves. So yeah, so as much of a change socially got to. That's one of the Mahatma Gandhi's sayings. If you want to change the world, change yourself first. So I believe in that.
So as an immigrant to this country who's been here for a little while, what's a piece of advice you'd give to somebody who just got here?
I really think that one has to figure out where you're going, in the sense, first, it's a matter of establishing your identity. There's a conflict of identity, in the sense, am I Indian or am I American? Again, so for myself, I have answered that India is my birth mother, whereas America is my adopted family. So you have right for both things, and so then my identity is created by the person who interacts with me. So in other words, most of the Indians, when they interact with me, think of me as Indian. lots of Americans who interact with me think of me as Indians. My patients, when they see me, they don't see me as Indians. They see me as a doctor, and they rarely, I wouldn't say rarely, they're really not concerned or interested in my heritage and things like that. So advice I'd give to somebody is that first understand who you are, and then you have to interact with the world accordingly. You know, other people have perceptions about you, and especially I've become, I should say, fairly thick-skinned about people having preconceived ideas about me, and you know, when somebody has difficulty pronouncing my name, I slowly tell them how to do it. If they do it again, then I mispronounce their name, so they get the message that, you know, don't try to be smart with me. I understand what you're trying to do, and similarly, so I'm quite sensitive when people have an attitude, so to speak, about me, and so I'd say if somebody wants to ask me what to do, then this is what you do. You learn the other people, and you learn about yourself, and it's no different. I mean, if I was in South America and Africa, it's the same story. You're an insider in one group and an outsider in another group. So whether you can become an insider in the outsider group, it's not likely, but you can try it. And, but there's no point not being part of it.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about that we haven't covered today?
I do want to mention about Troy. So Troy, we moved here in '74, and this is now 2016. It's been almost 40 years. And I think you probably know that Troy is the most diverse city in the state now. It beats Dearborn, which used to be have more immigrants. Now Troy has more immigrants. And over these 40 years, there have the Troy government, so to speak, the city hall and all, has had, even though they are non-partisan, is somewhat of a right-leaning kind of political agenda. But it has somewhat reformed itself and learned how to be more diversity friendly. And some of the recent things that have been happening have been very encouraging. For instance, welcoming the Syrian immigrants, where everybody has been critical of it. That's very positive. The mayor walking with the thousands of Indians when they had the criminal activity in the apartment building here and there, and then you know, they used to have conflict about religious services with the Troy City Hall, and you know, and that has been evenly taken care of, and so I feel very good about Troy, and that I've lived here, and obviously we built our first Hindu temple in the state in this place, and it's been flourishing, and we have never had any problem with hatred and people damaging this thing. So the whole community kind of is friendly. So there may be some people who are, so to speak, radical, and we had one of the mayor elected who was recalled, not for reasons of prejudice, but against race, but it was prejudice against sexual preference. And so I feel good, and we have been very happy with the school system. All my kids went to the public schools of Troy and ended up in University of Michigan, and they're, you know, doctors and dentists and things like that. So the education system is good, social system is good, the government is responsive, and you know, it's nice, neat, clean area, low crime, good shopping, and so when you say what else I want to say, I want to say bravo to try. They're great.
Thank you.